Welcome back to Christo's Cafe for another video. Today we're talking patch notes 7.3. The dev stream just went live, just wrapped up. We've got the patch notes open here, already released on their Twitter. I will load all of that in the description below so you guys can go and take a look. In the meantime, I figured we could go ahead, cover the cards, see what's changed, the good, the bad, the ugly, and kind of let you make your own decisions as to what you guys think of the changes to the game. They are going live tomorrow, October 1st. So you got about a day to think them through and theory craft a little bit before they go live. As always, you can check me out live on Twitch at twitch.tv/TheOneChristo. You can find me on Twitter as well with the same name. I will throw all that in the description. Please, if you enjoy this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I will continue to put out as much Gwent content as I possibly can. So let's take a look at the cards. Let's go through some of the changes. The biggest change so far that I think will impact the game is actually twofold. It's all about scenarios, really. But two things. Number one, scenarios are now all doomed. All of them, top to bottom, end to end. So no more double ball, no more double Getty if you pull that shit off with Lippy, no more of that. So we have doomed scenarios. They go bye-bye if they are removed. Ironically, it doesn't actually mean that much since one of the two remaining ways to remove them is gonna banish them anyway. Heatwave is still one of the two ways to remove scenarios. Everything else has been changed other than Shoop. So Shoop is the other option, but it has also been tweaked. So let's jump in and take a look actually and go through some of the cards and we can start talking about that. So first things first, everybody's favorite Bomb Heaver, right? So Bomb Heaver was 4.5 provisions. Destroy an enemy artifact. It is now deploy, damage an enemy unit by 1. If you have a bomb in your hand, damage it by 3 instead. Pretty darn useless. So in a perfect world, I mean, it's a 5 for 5. In a perfect world, it's a 7 for 5. Very conditional. The funny part about it is the bombs actually got worse. So you're going to see some of the bombs. I'm going to bring them up later because they were changed as well. A lot of them affecting artifacts. They got worse. So our poor Heaver is probably not going to get played ever again. At least for the time being. We've got Vivian. Oriel. So destroy an enemy artifact and boost self by its provision cost. This is actually a huge swing if you pull it off. The problem is if it isn't, it's essentially a 1.10 provision card, which just feels awful. So change made here, boost self by the provisions of the unit on the right. So that's super interesting. I mean, you're going to want something that's about 10 provisions or more. I'm thinking what you're going to probably see, if you see her anywhere, is going to be in monsters. You might see her drop next to something like an Eager, and you might see her drop next to, I don't know, Oberon if people are playing it. Maybe even in like a Kelly deck where you're limiting the units you're playing. Something like that that drops and plays for 14 points next to Kelly and a defender could be a really great option to have a really big round. So there are a few options, even just dropping it next to the Cave Troll, putting it next to a defender. What I think is low-key interesting about this, and we may see it happen. Wait, Sienna is on the neutral side of things. Repeat the deployability of the next unit you play this turn. So check that out. 12 provisions here. 12 provisions, and you get to do it twice. So you're boosting the deploy, you're boosting with the deploy for 12 provisions. You're doing it twice. That's 25 point Vivian. I don't know if the provisions will allow it to fit into that Aglaeus no unit deck, but I think that could be super interesting as well. So there might be ways around that to get Vivian and Sienna into the deck and just have a huge swing of points. We've got the, that's not the one we want the Frenzied Dao. Destroy an enemy artifact. Of course, this is getting removed because we don't destroy artifacts anymore. So going from a power of 6 to 7 and provisions 8 to 7, ability is now move a unit to the enemy row. 7 for 7, move a unit. I don't imagine this sees much play at all. It just doesn't seem that good. 7 for 7 with very conditional movement is just kind of meh. So it is what it is. We'll take a look at the bombs quick. I couldn't pronounce this on stream yesterday, and I still can't. So we'll call this the D-Bomb. Destroy an artifact. being changed. Damage a unit by 3 and give it Veil. I don't know why you would ever play this. 3 points for 4 and give it Veil. I guess theoretically it like counters a Hamadryad. I don't get it overall. I don't know why you would use it. The Dancing Star, destroy an artifact or damage a unit by 3, is now going to be damage an enemy unit by 3, death blow damage a unit to the right by 1 less, so it hits for 3 and death blow hits for 2. Best case scenario, it's a 5 for 5 weird removal, so again, probably just not played. It's my hunch there. Blizzard, destroy all artifacts. That's changed. So it is gone from a 6 provision card to an 8 provision card. Destroy the lowest power unit. Initiative, destroy all units with the lowest power instead. Good against Scoia'tael, Northern Realms with their volunteers maybe. Probably not seeing it played often. As well, it does have its weird conditions. Maybe in like a no unit deck you might see it, but not feeling a ton of love for that either. Now, of course, we have Shoop. So it's pretty interesting. We were talking about this on stream yesterday, twitch.tv/TheOneChristo to hang out in Christo's Cafe. We were talking about it yesterday, and we pretty much came to the conclusion that the only removal that would stay for artifacts is Heatwave. Again, big provisions for big removal, so that makes sense. And then Shoop, because same principle of it, you're dumping 13 provisions in to remove a card. The only thing that came up was that doing it for an 8-point body was actually quite a swing. So what they've gone and done is they have switched the Knight down to the Hunter and changed resilience to the Knight. So Shoop Hunter is now going to be destroy an artifact. So you get your 4 points and you destroy the artifact. And the Shoop Knight is now, not to be confused with Sugar Knight, is now instead of destroy an enemy artifact, you gain resilience. So you get that 8-point carryover, similar to Siri Nova, similar in the way that it has some conditions to make it unique. But that is pretty much what we're talking about when we're talking about artifacts and removal. So it's going to be interesting. The artifacts themselves, such as Ball and Passiflora, also get changed a little bit to make it a little bit more even. I think it's going to be interesting because the meta is going to run through a change where basically what's going to happen is people are going to decide, well, we're all going to play scenarios, and then people are going to play a shit ton of removal. And then that removal will remove the scenarios. People will stop playing them and removal will go away. The difference now is that with Heatwave, it's a very good control card in a lot of decks, so I think it sticks around for longer. And I think it makes some of those scenarios just really painful to play. The question is going to come down to, is having Devotion good enough to not play Heatwave? Because Oneromancy and Heatwave in just about every deck are the reasons people don't play Devotion. I think without those 2 main cards, you play Devotion and you don't really mind. I mean, maybe Northern Realms with Purify, that would be the only thing they can't really do. But otherwise, you see Devotion in mainly Skellige and mainly Northern Realms because you can actually outpoint most scenarios, so you don't mind removing them. So that comes down to some interesting tech choices when you're deciding what deck you want to build and if you want to build with Devotion or not. But a lot of that time, you're looking to have something like Heatwave in to remove your scenarios to try and keep you on pace with your opponent. It's going to depend. You know, you do see some Syndicate decks also playing Devotion, figuring that Passy is going to keep up with the point swing. So it's going to be interesting to see how the removal will affect the artifacts. It's definitely less swingy now, right? Heatwave just removes it 1 for 1, but that engine stays on the board, that Dame, things like that stay on the board, versus something like Shoop, where more provisions because it's 13, a condition in building your deck, you're going to remove that scenario, you're going to get a small body on the board, but it doesn't quite compete with the engine they drop. So you're definitely getting a much fairer trade now, as opposed to Bomb Heaver that just removed it for next to no provisions, right? You get a 4-point body on the board, you spend 5 provisions, you straight up remove an artifact, and it just sort of feels bad. So I'm very curious to see how this is going to play out, because I think there's a lot to unpack here, and it's going to solidify in the meta, I think, in the coming days. Let's jump into the other cards, though, because there are a few other little tweaks. Somewhat underwhelming, to be entirely honest. I didn't see a lot. I was expecting more buffs, to be entirely honest. We saw quite a few nerfs around some of the more problematic cards, some of the scenarios as well. Buffs, you've seen a few things, but maybe not as much as I would have hoped, in a sense of trying to change the meta around a little bit. But with big competitive tournaments coming up, I guess it can't be a surprise that the meta is not going to be shaken up that much. So let's take a look at the other cards for now, and we can kind of make a conclusion at the end. Phoenix, which sees no play. I actually saw it in Arena recently, but that was about the extent of it. It's going to drop from 13 to 11 provisions. So now you're getting 8 points with some carryover for 11 provisions, which obviously feels a little bit better. The reason the developers made for doing this is because Caranthir can no longer copy Phoenix, as it is a neutral card and not a monsters card. So it makes them feel better about going ahead and doing that. So that is still, I don't think it's an option. I mean, 8 points for 11 provisions with the carryover. Again, maybe there's some weird no unit deck that's going to want to do it. Adding a bandit to Von Everett, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, very much. But again, I do enjoy the fact that they're going ahead and adding different flavor to the game. So you're adding on things like that. You're adding on things like bandit keywords and all that kind of stuff. Ruins become an insectoid. It says primary category changed to insectoid, so I guess he's no longer a demon. I don't think it matters. There aren't really demon keywords, right, that affect it. So again, changing the flavor, maybe down the line that's going to mean something. Ardgaeth goes from 10 provisions to 9. It was played a little bit. Playing Frost on both rows for 3 turns. The thing is, most decks aren't really built around it that much. Red Riders is what's currently being played, right? For 6 provisions, you can spawn Frost on both enemy rows for 2 turns. You get Queen out, which is really all you want the Frost for in a lot of scenarios, and possibly a little bit of movement with the Bruiser. It is the Bruiser, right? Yeah, so you want a little bit of movement with the Bruiser, but otherwise, I don't know if that provision change is going to make it drastically better to play. I think we'll still see it from time to time, but nothing crazy there. Ghoul's powers change from 1 to 2, plus the melee consume. It was a good bronze card pre-Master Mirror in a few Thrive decks, because you would have some decent point Griffins and Noon Wraiths and things like that, but otherwise not really worth it. Though an extra point might make it slightly more playable. The Harpy is actually very interesting. So I'm a big fan of what they've done to this card, and they've done it a few times throughout the patch notes. The Harpy deploy, consume an allied unit, so that is staying. They added Bonded, spawn a Harpy egg in this row. So basically what happens once you play the second one, and from my understanding, the deploy, only the Bonded triggers after the deploy, so you cannot consume the egg, but you're going to get a Harpy egg, which will turn into a Harpy once consumed. So I think there is some place for this in some of those kind of Haunt, Death Wish decks, and I think that making that Harpy 5 for 5 plus an extra essentially 5 points, you fit it into Overwhelming Hunger, things like that, could see play. I do love the addition of Bonded. I think it adds really nicely again to the flavor of the game. Developer comment on this one is actually hilarious. When Papa Harpy and Mama Harpy really love each other. So I love the little extra tweaks they add into to these patch notes with the developer comments. But this one is interesting. I like the flavor of it. I like the direction it is going. Naglfar's crew gets 1 armor. I guess that makes it slightly more difficult to remove. I mean, it basically becomes 3 points on the turn you play it because it spawns Frost in the opposite row. I mean, I guess it doesn't have to. The only real time you see this is typically from Oberon. I don't think that changes based on this little boost, but again, down the line, that may change. Siren, her ability has changed as well. It basically says boost an allied Death Wish unit by 3. Instead, it's boost an ally by 1, making it 4 for 4 and useless. If it's a beast, boosted by 3 instead, making it a 6 for 4, so slightly better. Still not sure it sees a lot of play there. Haunt is now doomed. Pretty standard stuff there. Mourntart is now getting 1 armor. Banish all units in graveyard, then boost self by 1 for each. I don't know why they gave it armor. I don't know if I'm missing something. Maybe I am. But again, a little bit of a weird addition. Like, I don't know why you make that, but it is what it is. Skipping over to Skellige, we've got Darren. Move a card from your deck to your graveyard. So power is changed from 4 to 7. And abilities changed to ranged, damage self by 3, then move a card from your deck to your graveyard. So it gives you an opportunity to do some healing here, which is cool. I think it gives you the potential to synergize a bit with Battle Trance. So it sees some play in that deck. If this was a druid, it would probably see even more play. But just basically the way it's set up right now, it's gonna take the damage but has the opportunity to heal, so that is interesting. Developer comment basically says the same thing. Actually, they bring up a good point as well. Now, if you play this on the ranged row, it's not going to take the 3 damage, so you can just get that 7 damage. And it's cool. It has some synergies with, like, if we're talking Skellige, it has synergies with the Mork that is a beast. So move that to the melee row once it hits the graveyard if you go and use something like Darren to go ahead and do that. Olaf. I've seen some Olaf meme decks recently. Provision change from 11 to 10 makes it a touch more playable. Rage of the Sea. So this is basically the Skellige deck, the #1 deck. I think if I had to guess, I would say top win percentage as well. They said Shield Wall was 4. I have to assume Rage is #1. So Rage has gone from provisions 14 to 13, makes it slightly worse. And on top of that, Spawn, Rain on an enemy row for 1 turn. We're actually changing that to 2 turns, but we're taking away a charge. So 2 charges, 2 turns, you still get Rain. I think that Rage's main benefit was the flexibility of the card, right? You can use charges 3 times. You can use 1 in round 1 to win it. You save a couple for round 3 to win it. I like the flexibility of this card. This takes a bit away and forces you to plan a bit more in advance. I saw Rage being used a lot when it came down to either you drop Greatsword and you drop Rage right away to boost your Greatsword, so it gets it out of removal range at 5 to 6 or more. And the other thing was to kill a unit. So you have a 3 and a 1 on the opposing side. You drop Rage, it kills the 1 and hits the 3 down to 2. So now if you do that, you actually lose a point because that second proc on the second turn won't actually hit anything, assuming your opponent doesn't play something on that row. So I think that's actually very, very interesting because it forces you to think a bit more in advance. The use cases change ever so slightly, but I think this is actually a very nice nerf, and the 1 provision doesn't hurt as well. Skellige, their bronze cards are just so good. People are getting more and more used to playing lower and lower provision decks with them and just throwing in the right golds, and bronzes definitely pick up the slack here. So it keeps the same amount of points though, which I also think is interesting, right? Because you're getting it for 2 turns, so you're still getting basically what, 4 points, 6 points. You're still getting a 12-point leader ability versus Patricidal Fury that's 8, but you usually are able to kill the 3. I think there might be some change and people might flip back to Fury a little bit. Champion's Charge is obviously very good with it. So for the extra 2 provisions, you might see a bit more Patricidal Fury out there, which I think is still a very good leader ability right now. The Greatsword. This has been a staple. When it came out, people were saying, some people, crazy people, were saying it was trash. I always thought it was quite nice, mainly because Hjalmar is just so good with it. 10 points. Now it damages itself by 6, so it drops down to 4. I think this is a great change because that 1 proc we were talking about with Rage of the Sea, for example, uses 1 of its 2 charges. So the Rage nerf actually also makes Greatsword a nerf as well, or takes a nerf as well, which I think is also interesting here because it's a little bit more difficult to go and get that Greatsword buff back up. You have to commit more of your leader ability. It does do it for 2 turns though, which I think is interesting. So you get that balance where if you decide to use the charges, you're going to get more of a buff on here. However, you're using 50% of your leader ability as opposed to a third of it. We've got Stunning Blow. 4 provision, 4 damage with armor, increase it to 6. We are now going 5 provision here. Damage unit by 5. The armor part stays the same. This Stunning Blow card is in pretty much every Skellige deck at 4 provisions, right? This is now in line with stuff like Boiling Oil and Nature's Rebuke still does the 5. It has a conditional extra point to do a bit more with armor, which I think makes it more complicated to use, right? This makes it more complicated because you're already taking provisions away with, let's say, Rage, for example. How do you fit this card into your deck at 5 provisions? Do you play 1 instead of 2 maybe? Is that the option? Do you put Gutting Slash back into the deck? Is Gutting Slash more usable with Patricidal Fury and there's more provisions there? So how are you going to balance that versus everything else in your deck, which I think is what's the challenge here. Overall, I don't think it's an overly strong nerf, right? It lines up the cards with other 5 removal. However, because of the challenges in building that Skellige deck that keep getting reduced provisions, I think it doesn't fit into the faction as nicely as some of the other 5 provision removal cards. Getty is also nerfed. That's fine. We'll quickly talk about Viraxis because we were expecting this for a while. I don't know why they didn't do it last patch. Viraxis is now 11 provisions to 12 provisions here. Amphibious Assault gets hit next. Amphibious Assault goes from 12 provisions to 13. Amphibious and Blood Eagle are probably the 2 most played Echo cards. Blood Eagle took the nerf last time around, so it's at 12 provisions, and Amphibious is actually getting buffed or nerfed down to 13 provisions. I think it still gets played all the time. I think drawing cards in Northern Realms, you have to draw your goals to win the game, so it is going to be included as well. Shield Wall takes the next nerf. People have been talking about this obviously all season long. How do we nerf Shield Wall? How do we nerf it? Do we remove charges? Do we do something to Enseus to make him unable to gain a shield, give him Veil, things like that? What they decided to do is just kick a provision off of it. They're down to 13. Kicking it down to 13 plus Amphibious up to 13 plus Viraxis up to 12 is basically 3 provisions that were taken away from this deck. And Northern Realms is typically a deck that plays really high highs and then really a ton of bronze 4 provision cards. And I think this makes it more difficult to put together. You're still going to look at probably frigates. You're going to look at having a bunch of soldiers to support that frigate. And that's going to kind of be your round 1 win con, maybe with the drummers, maybe with an Anna, things like that. And then round 3, you're still going to be looking at getting your Barons, your Enseus, your Selkirk, your Viraxis out. So I don't think the game plan changes drastically, but I do think that there's going to be some serious changes that need to be made to that deck to just keep it balanced out. I don't know if it's enough yet because it doesn't change the core of the game of the deck itself. I'm curious to see how it plays out. Probably a slight tweak, but I'm not entirely sure it's enough. Maybe takes 1 threat away, but the biggest part of that deck is if they draw all of their goals, it really, really makes it difficult to remove all of their threats with Visigoda, with Enseus, with Viraxis, with the War Elephant getting in there, Selkirk, all of that. It makes it hard to remove it all. If this takes away one of those threats, you might be in a better spot. So it's going to be interesting. We'll keep an eye on that. The Damn Sorceress. Zeal, Order, remove a unit's shield and boost self by 2. They've added a charge to it, which just means you can now manipulate that a bit more. I don't know that you're going to see this in too many decks to counter Shield Wall, if that's what their kind of mentality was here. But adding the charge definitely makes it more versatile. I think it's a great addition. Again, talking about that flavor, just the little tweaks, the little changes that I think are important. Bane Death. Bane Death. I wanted this to get changed and I wanted it to be so good. Elves need the love, and I've always been a Scoia'tael player. I've always loved Scoia'tael and the elves. So I had high hopes for this. They switched the prologue. So the prologue is no longer playing Elven Deadeye in this row. It is now Spawn of Vern's Commando. So we'll take a look at that in a second. The other thing is they've actually upped this from 13 to 14 provisions, which hurts my heart just a little bit. So Vern's Commando is a 3-point engine. At the end of your turn, boost self by 1 if you control only elves, ignore if you control Vern. Okay, so basically part of what they were saying is that Bane Death was the only scenario to not provide you with a engine on turn during the prologue. The prologue doesn't spawn you an engine, just spawns you a Deadeye. This spawns you a conditional engine that requires you to either play Vern, which is something you're likely doing, but probably not right at the start, or play only elves. And my only issue with that is it takes away from the flexibility of the deck. And I think this Scoia'tael deck needed flexibility to begin with. It makes it a bit challenging to play without it. So I preferred the Deadeye. I thought that was better because it synergizes better with Vern and Vern's range ability. So we'll see how this plays out. I still think Waylay on the second chapter is just not good. Deal 3 damage, death blow. Like, you're probably not killing things all the time. You're not always getting the Deadeye. So it's 3 points or 6. At least you get an engine now. So we'll see how that plays out. But I don't love that change. Ithlin goes from 11 provisions to 10. Some hand buff. I mean, making Scoia'tael a hand buff faction I like, so that's cool. Zoltan Warriors going from 12 to 11. This is spawning more dwarves, trying to make dwarves a little bit better. They were played sparingly, so maybe this helps them a little bit. I don't think it's hugely interesting. The Dragoon. So melee, move an enemy, deploy range, move an allied unit. They're basically changing this. Instead of it being a 5 for 5, it's a 4 for 4. I think part of Scoia'tael's problem was they did need some elves on the lower end for provision wise. So I think this does help them. Still very, very situational, but better, for example, than if you're not playing Harmony, if you're just playing an elf deck and you do want movement, this is better than playing a Hawk, for example, especially with Feign Death, because you do need to just play elves. The change I'm excited for, I know it seems silly and it seems small, but the elf change I'm excited for is actually the Officer. Damage an enemy by 2, boost an allied unit by 2. What they've done is they've added a bonded ability to that. Bonded use both abilities, so if you get them both out in the same round, you will go ahead and get both. I like that. I really do, because basically what happens here is this gives you a 4 provision elf that's worth playing. I always found building an elf deck, the lower end 4 provision elves were always kind of iffy. You end up playing some trash, right? If you look at them, like the 4 provision cost units. That's what I wanted. Units. You've got like some real garbage down here if you want an elf specifically. Like, I was playing a bomber at one point because I was running out of options. Like, the bowman and the saboteur were like in there. So I think the officer makes it much, much better and easier to be able to play all elves top to bottom. Polly. Good old Polly. So deploy is now move a unit to the other row. Order, give that unit to armor. So you basically get both at the same time. Dwarves may be a little bit better with this, but nobody played it before. Don't think anybody is playing it now. Nilfgaard, Masquerade Ball. It was not good enough to take Masquerade Ball and make it doomed, because they did that, which they did to all of them. Basically what's happening here is they are also upping it to 15 provisions. More expensive. This is the like be all and end all of Nilfgaard right now. They're not very good, so this is quite huge. Upping it by 1, I still think it gets played. It's probably up there with the best scenarios, if not the best scenario. So it's pretty solid here. I still think you play it because the poison removal plus the Dame engines is just too good to not play. In the developers' comments, they do say that they have buffed other stuff to make it better. So let's take a look and see what they have buffed to see if they really made up for it with other cards. So Palmerin. Instead of damaging enemy unit by 2 and giving adjacent units shield, what we're doing now is damage an enemy unit by 2, apply spying to adjacent enemy units. If Milton is in your hand, always trigger. So if you play Milton, or if you have Milton in your hand, you're always getting those spies. I do like that idea. I think it's very interesting. There are so many cards that interact with the spy aspect of Nilfgaard that add some flavor. Not 100% sure that it's going to see a ton of play, but I think it does fit, again, the faction mentality a little bit more. We've got Milton. 8 provisions. We're going down to 7, keeping the 5 points. Damage an enemy unit by 1. Death blow, damage adjacent units by 2. I feel like that deploy, except for killing your own spies, is kind of meh. Palmerin being in hand gives you that ability. I kind of, in my mind, think it happens better the other way around. Getting the spying is probably more valuable if you're playing that kind of deck. Even if you're playing things like coup de grace and stuff like that in there, might be better. Damaging an enemy unit by 1 is really around hitting the spy, I think, unit. So Interesting synergies there. Again, I'd have to think about it and brainstorm a little bit more to get it all put together in my head, but I think there are some options. Slave infantry, provision change from 5 to 4. Transform an allied unit into slave infantry. Okay, cool. I don't know how much of a buff that is. The Novice, provision change from 5 to 4, power change from 5 to 4. So we're 4 for 4, cycling card. Not sure how much that'll do. Maybe they're looking to help Nilfgaard get the right cards in their hands. So things like Milton and Paul Marin's death blows, or sorry, other like secondary effects occur. So that could be part of what they're doing there. We've got Slave Hunter. Power change from 3 to 4. Ability change to assimilate. Order, damage an enemy unit by 2. Gives you a slightly bigger body. Keeps you the assimilate tag. Changes that deploy to an order. Makes it different. I feel like it's almost a little bit better technically because you are getting a bigger body that stays on the board, hopefully, for your assimilate. The deal 2 damage is nice, but at the end of the day, you're playing this because it's an assimilate engine more than anything else, I want to say. Slave Driver. Now a soldier. Damage an enemy unit by 2. Increased by 1 for each locked unit. So my thing with some of this is that you're creating... Okay, so Nilfgaard does spying, Nilfgaard does locking, Nilfgaard does statuses in general, right? So that's where you're trying to push these flavors over to that style of gameplay. I just don't know if any single one of them is really good enough to make the decks viable, or if Nilfgaard just goes right back to Masquerade Ball and relies on that some more. So that's my only concern with these changes that they're making, is I'm just not 100% sure that they're doing enough to make that difference. Trigger the deploy abilities of all adjacent bronze soldiers. So this is getting a provision change from 9 to 8, more playable, and then we saw, interestingly enough, you just changed some of the deploy abilities, right? You went and turned Hunter, for example, into an order instead. But you did change Slave Driver into a soldier, so you do get that deploy. A few synergies there. Again, not convinced that you're getting all the synergies you want, but I think that you get some options. Same thing with Letho. He's going from power change of 6 to 8, so getting a solid body. If both are in your hand, the thing is, if neither are in your hand, you get nothing. So worst case scenario, if he does brick, you get an 8 for 8. Feels a little bit better. Means he'll maybe see some play in a very specific deck style. Shillard. Set the power of the highest unit in opponent's hand to 1. Power change from 4 to 5. So 5, this is kind of interesting. I don't know. He hasn't seen play before. I don't know if he'll see play now. This random RNG stuff makes it a little bit more difficult. It's typically not something that people play Gwent for. So he may still not see it, not see play just based on the type of card he is, less so than what his ability actually is. Good old Siggy. Intimidate. Profit 4 for every unique gang category in your starting deck. Increase his profit by 1. His power changes from 3 to 4. So this profit gets really big. It probably gets you a little bit stuck with over profiting depending on how your deck is set up. I mean, does it feel great even at 4 points? Not really, but again, I like the concept here that they're going ahead and just adding a little bit more incentive to play some of these cards. I just don't know how much play they'll actually get. Passiflora. Passiflora now added Doom, of course, and they flipped Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. You still get the Sly Seductress on turn 1 on your prologue. You then gain 9 coins the second time a Blind Eye is played. The third time you get your Peaches. So you get your Peaches on turn 3. They're calling it a nerf because it spawns 2 engines right away. So your second engine technically takes an extra turn to get out, which I think is fine. The bright side to this, if you look at Adriano, for example, Adriano needs some coins in the bank to be able to hit his tribute, right? So if Adriano is what you're playing to get your second chapter rolling, you play Passy, you play another Blind Eye, you play Adriano, you've already gained the 6 coins. So you've got the 6 in the bank, you profit for 2 up to 8, you pay your tribute, you get your second Sly Seductress on the board, which now bonds the 2 of them. I like this. in the sense that it guarantees you a way to get coins. Sometimes you're playing against lockdown or something and you feel a bit bad because you can't use hidden cash, for example, for coins, things like that. This in general feels a little bit better. I don't think it's as much of a nerf as it is just a change. It changes how the card is played. It changes the situation in which you need it, and how you want it played out. So I kind of like that. Bilzen is going from 3 to 2. So fee 3 to fee 2. Oh yes, his fee has changed. So trigger profitabilities of adjacent units. Fee is 2 to boost them by 2. I think this is interesting. Again, you're just jacking up the number of coins you're getting, right? So I'm curious to see if this fits in any decks. I'm not 100% convinced it will, but I'm curious to see how decks respond to Passy's kind of change and nerf, because I think there is some ability there to go ahead and make those modifications, right? You might see that because Passy's not as strong from an engine perspective, we're relying more on profit and on coins to get the job done. We've got Payday, damage enemy unit by 2, death blow, gain 5 coins. Change to damage enemy unit by 5. Gain a coin for each extra point of damage dealt. So again, you're getting your 5 for 5, just like Skilliga got their 5 for 5, and you get a little bit of an extra ability. The only thing I don't like about Payday is it doesn't give you any extra boost. It's 5 points at the best, right? If you kill something for 5, you're getting nothing else. If you kill for 4, you get a profit of a coin. I don't like it as much, but you couldn't do much else for this card, right? If you went and said it was 6 or 7, you have to up the provisions. So it is a crime. So it has some synergies with Horson and with Gord and with your other Intimidate cards. So, I mean, it is probably going to be worth more than straight up 5 points for 5 provisions most of the time when you play it. But they admit it actually in the patch notes, it has a lower ceiling. The Scribe's Tribute has changed from 4 to 2. So that's a pretty drastic change. Whenever you spawn 1 or more units to the battlefield, gain a coin, and the tribute boost self by 2 is now 2 coins instead. That gets them up to a 6 and out of a lot of removal range. So this becomes a much more interesting engine. Might be kind of a little bit of a secondary engine to your Fallen Knight on the board, right? This is going to be your engine for points. That'll be your engine for coins, and maybe they'll balance each other out a little bit, but that is definitely an option for you. And Eavesdrop is last. Profit 5, draw a card, put a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. Again, they're kind of pushing this whole cycling bit. Provision change is now 5 for your 5 profit. So it's straight up 5 for 5, essentially assuming you have a spender, and then allows you to draw a card and cycle through. So that's it. Those are the changes. That's what is going on right now with patch 7.3, which goes into effect tomorrow. We are September 30th today. Tomorrow, October 1st, this is going to go down. So I'm curious to see how the scenarios are going to change the meta. I don't think it's going to be drastic. I think there will be little tweaks. I think poor Masquerade Ball, now that it can't be played twice and now that it's more provisions, it's not going to make Nilfgaard much better. I don't think Scoia'tael's Feigned Death one is going to change much. I think we'll still see plenty of Passy, plenty of Masquerade Ball, the occasional Haunt, and I'm curious to see how removal will play accordingly. I think Heatwave is still in most decks. I think most decks still probably don't love Devotion unless they really, really need it. So I think we're going to see a lot of removal. We're still going to see a lot of Heatwave and Narrowmancies and everything we've kind of seen before. So that being said, let me know what you think of the patch. Let me know what decks you're excited to play. Please throw them in the comments below. I'm super curious. Again, these patch notes came out maybe an hour ago, so I haven't fully processed them all. I just wanted to get this information out to you guys as soon as possible. So let me know, keep me posted. You can come find me on Twitch, Twitter, and whatnot. Tell me what you think. I'm super excited to see the direction this game takes, especially with some of the upcoming changes. Like, this stuff really changes the structure of the game. Not an overwhelming huge change, but it's really changing how the cards interact and not just changing the cards themselves. So keep me posted, let me know, and until next time, you're always welcome to come chill in Christo's Cafe.
Oh, what a lovely tea party.